by saying the week that schools got shut down, the week following was supposed to be our school Spirit Week. Well, we obviously didn't get to have that, so I love Spirit Week, and I was a big hand in planning March's Reading Month and planning that Spirit Week that we had, so I have decided to have Spirit Week from home, and if you guys want to participate, you are more than welcome to. So I'll post the days that I'm doing on in the description of this video and also on Class Dojo. But today I am doing Favorite Sports Teams Day, so you can see I have my U of M jersey on. I am a big U of M fan. So today's Favorite Sports Team Day. So if you want to put on your favorite sports team memorabilia, you feel free. Hang on, I gotta fix my camera here. There we go. You feel free, but like I said, I'm going to be doing different days every day this week, so I will post those, and if you want to participate, feel free, send me pictures, and I'll be super excited to see that. Okay, so on Friday, in my last video, we started talking about time, and we talked about time to the hour, and how when it's time is on the hour, the big hand or the minute hand is always on the 12. So I told you to do those last three clocks on your own, so I'm going to go ahead and review what those should look like for you. The first one they wanted you to draw was 5 o'clock. So when we're drawing 5 o'clock, that is exactly on the hour. If you look at it, it's 5 dot dot 0 0. That 0 0 means o'clock, means right on the hour. So that means, since it's right on the hour, my big hand is always going to be facing that 12. Right on the hour means that my minute hand or the bigger hand is always going to be pointing straight up at the 12, right? Since it's 5 o'clock, that means my hour hand or my smaller hand should be pointing right at the 5. So for that first one, this is what you should have drawn, right? You don't need that dotted line. That's just there for me to show you that I got it pointing at the 5. So that's what you should have. When the time is to the hour, your minute hand or your long hand is always pointing right at the 12, and then your hour hand or your shorter hand will always be pointing at whatever hour it's telling you. So this one was 5 o'clock, so I have my minute hand at the 12 and my hour hand at the 5. Forgot an eraser today, so we're using my finger. Let's look at the next one. The next one asks us to draw 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, right? So I'm right on the hour, which means my minute hand goes where? Straight up at the 12. My minute hand is my bigger hand, so it should look like that. And then it's 2 o'clock, so that means my hour hand should go directly at that 2. Once again, I'm going to draw in this dotted line. You do not need it. I'm just drawing it to show you that I have it pointed straight at that 2. So this shows 2 o'clock. My minute hand or my long hand pointing up at the 12. My hour hand or my short hand pointing straight at that 2. This is what you should have drawn for that second clock at the bottom of the hour page. And then the last one asks you to draw 10 o'clock. 10 dot dot 0 0. So as always, when it's time to the hour, my minute hand or my long hand is at the 12. Short hand or my hour hand. So that should make sense. Now on the next page, they start talking about half hour time. So that means, so an hour, in 1 hour, this minute hand, so let me draw my minute hand. In 1 hour, this minute hand will go all the way around the clock. It's kind of a bad arrow, but you get the picture. So in 1 hour, that minute hand will travel all the way in a clockwise circle around that clock. And each of these numbers represents a different amount of time. So, like we've been talking about, when it's pointed up at the 12, it always represents 0. It is 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. You have to look at your hour hand for that, but it represents the 0. At the 6, when our minute hand gets down to the 6, when our tall hand is pointing down at this 6, it represents 30, meaning from here down to here, we have gone 30 minutes. It's been 30 minutes or half of an hour because 1 hour is 60 minutes. So when it travels down to the 6, which is halfway through that circle, it means that it has been 30 minutes. So when our minute hand, just a minute, let me erase this. When our minute hand is pointing down, our minute hand is our long hand. When it's pointing straight down at that 6, that means it's something 30. We have to look at the hour hand to find out, but that means it's something 30. So on that, let's look at an example. Before we look at the page, let's look at an example. So we are looking at the half hour time now. Hour time is pointing at the 12. Half hour time is pointing at the 6. So let's say this is the time we see when we look at our clock. Here's what we have. My minute hand, my long hand, is pointing straight down at my 6, which tells me that it's something 30. So I don't know what the hour is yet, but I know that I'm going to have this because my minute hand is pointing straight down at that 12. Now, when we look at half hour time, when we're looking at any time that isn't right on the 12, your hour hand is always going to be in between two numbers. So right now, my hour hand is right in between my 4 and my 5. We know that the hands on a clock always are going this way. They are always traveling like this. So, if we're looking at this, that means that this hand, if it's moving like this, it hasn't gotten to the 5 yet. If it started here and it's going around like that, it hasn't yet hit this 5, which means that you're going to look at the number beforehand. So if the arrow is in between two numbers, you're always going to look at the smaller number, the number right before it. So this, since the smaller number, or the number right before, is the 4, this time shows 4:30. And this can be kind of confusing. Time can be a really hard thing to learn, so if you don't understand it or you have any questions, please let me know. It's hard to learn in person, so even harder to learn like this, I'm sure. So if you have any questions about that and that doesn't make sense to you, feel free to connect with me on Zoom, message me on Class Dojo. I'm available to FaceTime if that helps. Whatever you guys need, I'm here for. So let's take a look at that second page on time, that half hour page. Some of you might be done with this already, and if you are, that is okay. That's awesome. You can use this as a way to help you check your work if you've completed it already. If you haven't, you can use this as a way to learn it and figure it out. So let's look at that first one. The first one on that half hour page. At the top of that half hour page, it says, we know it is time to the half hour when the big hand is on the 6. So in that first set, it wants us to circle or color all of the clocks that are set to the half an hour. So let's look at the very first clock we see there. The very first clock I see has the big hand pointing to the 12 and the small hand pointing to the 1. So that's about what you guys see. Now, in this, I see that my big hand or my minute hand is pointing up at the 12, and my hour hand or my short hand is pointing down at the 1. So we learned that when it's time to the hour, the arrow is pointing at the 12, and when it's time to the half hour, our arrow is pointing at the 6. This clock is showing us 1 o'clock. This clock is showing us this time, 1 o'clock. So this is not a time to the half hour. So that first clock you will not circle or color in because we are looking for time to the half an hour, which means we are looking for the minute hand, that long hand, to be pointing down at the 6. Let's look at the next one. In the next one, I have my minute hand pointing down, and I have my hour hand pointing over here. And I'm going to draw that dotted line so we can see what two numbers that hour hand is in between. So in this one, I do see that my minute hand is pointing down at the 6. My long hand is pointing to the 6, which means that it is time to the half hour. So you can go ahead and circle that clock or color that clock in, mark it off however you want. This is time to the half an hour. But how do we know which half hour? Like we talked about, our hand is always moving this way. It's always moving in this direction. So has it hit this 9 yet? If it's going up this way? Nope, it's still before the 9. So, like always, we choose our smaller number. It is the smaller number. If it's in between 2, you choose the number before, the smaller number. So, this clock is showing us 8:30. 8:30 is the time we have on that second clock. So you can go ahead, if you haven't already, color that clock in or circle it, highlight it, whatever it is that you're using to mark with. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, our next one. Let's figure out what time this next clock is showing. That arrow pointing there, and this one pointing there. Once again, I'm going to draw my dotted line, but do not feel like you need to. That just helps me see where my arrow is pointing. Okay, so on this one, we have an arrow pointing, our big arrow, our minute hand is pointing up at the 12, which tells us what? That it's time to the hour. This is time to the hour. So we will not be coloring this clock in or circling this clock because this is not a half an hour, and we are looking for half hours today. But what time does this clock show? We have time to the hour. Our minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12. And where is our hour hand pointing at? The 4. So this clock is showing us 4 o'clock. So we're going to look at this next one, and then I'm going to ask you guys to do those last bottom 3 on your own. Those bottom 3 are asking you to draw in the time the time that it's telling you. So you have to draw in 3:30, 12:30, and 7:30. At the beginning of my next video, I will go over those answers with you. But for now, I want you to go ahead and do those on your own. But let's take a look at this last one. This last one where we have to circle in or color in. We have to determine if this clock is showing us a half hour, because that is what we are coloring today. So let's take a look. So I look at my minute hand first, and I see that my minute hand, or my longer hand, is pointing straight down at the 6, which is what we want to see. So you can go ahead, you can color that in, circle it, whatever you're doing. This clock is showing us to the half an hour. Now I want you to come up here and look, and you decide what time is that showing us. Hasn't hit the 11 yet. Between these two numbers, our arrow is pointing between the 10 and the 11. Between those two numbers, which number is smaller? Which number has it not hit yet? It has not hit the 11 yet, but it has gone past the 10, which means this number is showing us 10:30, or this clock is showing us 10:30. Now, the only case, there's one case scenario where the number that you pick will not be the smaller one. It's always the number before, and every other time on the clock, it's going to be the smaller number. But when your clock is showing this time, it's between two numbers. It's between two numbers, 12 and 1. In between the two numbers, 12 and 1, the smaller number is 1. The smaller number is 1. But this is the only time that the number that you pick will be the bigger number, because it's past the 12, but it hasn't hit the 1 yet. So this clock is showing 12:30. That's the only time the number is going to be the smaller number. In this case scenario, it's 12:30. So it's always the number beforehand. If the arrow is here, it's this number. If the arrow was here, it's 2. If it was here, it's 3. Just like when it's here, it's 12. It's always the number right before, and most of the time it's the smaller number. So that's all I have today. The next page starts going over quarter times, which means 15 minutes. So we went from hour to half an hour. Whoops, you can't see that. We went from hour to half an hour, and then tomorrow we're going to start going over 15-minute intervals. So that's all I have for today. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.